This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
So I'd like now to introduce Professor Laurie Oakes, who is Professor and Chair of UCSB's Department of Feminist Studies. Her areas of study are reproductive politics, the anthropology of health, medicine, and science, and feminist and community-based participatory research, areas in which she has published widely. And she is going to serve as our panel moderator. And before we begin, though, I do want to thank her for proposing tonight's events for the Humanities in the Brain program. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would like to thank the IHC and also the Carsey Wolf Center for supporting us. We came up with this idea as part of our UCSB Health Medicine and Healthcare Working Group, which is a group that we've gotten together on this campus. Zakia Luna's here and other members of the working group are here because we want to be able to spark some discussions both on UCSB and in the community about issues around health and healthcare. So one of the things that I think is interesting, you just heard that some of my research interests are in health, but I think that for many of us that the issues that we were talking about here around memory, around family care and support are close to our hearts too. So it's not just about research, but it's about our lived experience and our families and our friends. So what we had in mind with this panel is for each of the panelists to say some remarks about how some of the issues in this film relate to their lives and or their research. So let me introduce each one of them, and then I'm going to ask them to share some comments briefly, and then we'll open the floor open for questions. So first, this is Professor Patricia Cohen, who is recently retired history professor here at UCSB. And she is on the advisory board for the Parkinson's Association. And she is also someone who is here speaking as a community member who is a caregiver. Next, we have Professor Kenneth Kosick, who is a professor here at UCSB and the co-director of the Neuroscience Research Center. And he's somebody who's doing research specifically on Alzheimer's disease with members around the world, right? And next we have Donna Beal, who I'm really glad could join us from the California Central Chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. So she's somebody who's doing work in our local community to raise awareness about Alzheimer's disease and prevention and support. So Donna, how about, would you like to be able to start? I'll
Sure.
share a few comments.
I'm happy
Great.
to start.
Thank you
First
so
of
much.
all, I am an alumni from UCSB, go Gauchos. And this auditorium was not here when I was going to school here, and it feels very much like home because I was a dramatic arts major. So I apologize if my voice is a little too loud, but how do you watch that movie and not tear up a box of Kleenex? I don't know about you guys, right? So my 2-minute remarks, if you will. When I first started with the chapter about 5 years ago, one of the people that I know in the public health arena said, "You've got to read this book," and handed me Still Alice. And it was right around the time that Lisa Genova had finally gotten a publisher and had it out there. And it kind of became my first entree into Alzheimer's disease. Prior to that, I'd been doing a lot of work with lungs, asthma and COPD and that kind of stuff. I jumped from the lungs to the brain. But truthfully, it really highlighted everything that we as an association do. Our job is to help caregivers navigate this journey, to find the moments of joy, to live in the moment with their loved ones, to learn never to argue with them, to learn all the things that you need to learn along this journey. And it is not an easy thing to learn. It is very, very difficult for families to navigate. How do you provide care for someone who is living with dementia? And even though our name is the Alzheimer's Association, we actually do work with families who are caring for somebody with all types of dementia. So it's not just Alzheimer's.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so I'm Ken Kosick, and my relation to this film is actually twofold. I am a neurologist and I care for Alzheimer patients, but I am primarily an Alzheimer researcher, and I think the hat perhaps I'll wear this evening is more of the scientist, because the research that we do is actually very much on familial Alzheimer's disease. We actually have done a lot of work on tracking down the very gene they talk about in this film, the presenilin gene. I personally and our team have been very interested in issues about genetics and who you tell and when you test, and the whole issue of the 3 children, 1 wanted to know, 2 wanted to know, 1 did not, 1 was positive. There are many fascinating ethical issues that arise in settings like this, and of course the whole condition of Alzheimer's itself and the deterioration you saw, but from a scientific point of view, the underlying pathology, the amyloid that was accumulating in the brain, these are all things that we're very, very much involved with in my lab, and part of a large community of researchers that are working to really make a dent in this really terrible, terrible disease.
Thanks so much.
And I'm Pat Cohen, and I'm, as Laurie said, a member of the faculty who took retirement last year because I have a husband who has Parkinson's disease and dementia, and now his diagnosis is Lewy body dementia. It's a little different from Alzheimer's, but I got a copy of this film. I knew I couldn't come here for the full 3 hours or 2 hours or whatever you're spending here tonight, so I got a copy. And I watched the movie this evening with my husband, and that was an interesting experience. We talked about a number of the things in it that are similar to what we're experiencing, and then other things that are different. It's a huge challenge. I'd just like to underscore what Alice says in that talk to the Alzheimer's Association, where she says it's really not suffering. You're not, they don't want pity for actually suffering, but it's just the challenge, the sheer challenge of things that you can't control. Living in the present is a very good idea, except I was a busy professor living in the future, and I'm still living in the future. It's very hard for me to pull back and try to live one day at a time. And it's just a real clash of cultures, which you see in this film too. A husband who's on a fast-track career with a great job offer and wants to do so much, and he actually makes the choice to do that because he has this daughter who's willing to step in and help out too. But it's a roller coaster, and the most important thing that I ever did in the last 10 years I've been dealing with this was get involved in the Parkinson's Association that has a caregivers support group that meets once a week, and I'm in there with people who know exactly what I'm doing, what I'm dealing with, and no one else does. No one else really understands, and it's just a lifesaver.
Great. Thank you so much. 3 very different perspectives, and so we'd like to open the floor up for any questions or comments if you'd like to direct to any of the panelists specifically, or if you have a comment about the film more generally. And we have some people with microphones, so there are folks over here. Thank you.
I just have a question of how often this happens in the public. Seems so rare, but is this often? Because I do know someone right now in Santa Barbara that's just had a diagnosis, and same thing, and I just wasn't aware that it was out there. So could you comment as to how common this is?
Yes. So it is important to, your comments are very germane, because the face of Alzheimer's disease is not always someone who's elderly. And those individuals that have heart condition are rare. We generally say it's about 1% of all people with Alzheimer's disease. It's probably even less than that. It's at the most 1%. So it's exceedingly rare to find people with these mutations. It's a little bit more common, but not much, to find people that are under 65 that have Alzheimer's, whether you find a mutation or not. It is something that when they have a mutation, we can attribute the disease to that mutation. But in the remaining 99%, we really don't know the cause at all.
I just wanted to share a personal story. When I was taking care of my mother-in-law that had Alzheimer's, I am a physician, and I even got surprised. She would have moments where she was completely confused, not recognize me at all. And then one day when I was taking care of her, she completely came back, completely normal, and remembered things for, I would say, perhaps 5 to 6 minutes. And those minutes would come and go occasionally, but when they were there, it would be so incredible. It was like the person was back. And like you say, is never judge a person that has dementia because they really don't know what they are doing.
I think that kind of, your observation is really good. I think we see that in the film too, where even at the very end, when her daughter reads her this piece, she still had this understanding and was able, hardly verbal at all at that point, but yet had some understanding of what her daughter was saying. There is this cyclical behavior in Alzheimer's where a person can actually spend a few minutes really with it and then out of it. Sometimes it lasts for a few minutes, can last for a few hours. It's another aspect of the disease that is very poorly understood.
And I would add to that that it's also an aspect of the disease that can be tremendously overwhelming and unbelievably frustrating for caregivers, because they just cannot understand why, and this is the story we always say, their loved one cannot remember that they just ate breakfast, but they can tell you exactly what they wore, exactly where they were, and exactly what the room smelled like 40 years ago on their wedding day. And that is unbelievably frustrating to understand.
And even when you do understand it, it's really frustrating because if the person can be good part of the time, and the parts of the time when the person is completely out to lunch, you are angry about that. And you can't be angry about that because the person can't help it. But that stark contrast that can shift very quickly, very hard to take.
One thing I didn't see in Alice was paranoia. She could be frightened or disoriented, but she never felt like someone was trying to hurt her or do anything like that. My mother was an Alzheimer's victim, and she thought her son-in-law was trying to kill her. My sister was trying to take all the money out of her checking account, and I don't know if that's normal or that's an abnormal thing.
So I think I'll try and field that one and fill in anything you want. If you've seen one person with dementia, you've seen exactly one person with dementia. It is very personalized. It is very unique to the individual. And it's based on, as Alice says in the movie, what makes you you are the things that are your memories. And just kind of your personality and who you are gets heightened a lot of times with the disease. But again, not everyone is going to have every one of the types of behaviors that can happen in dementia. Paranoia is one of those types of behaviors. Not everyone will exhibit that.
However, it is quite common. And you're right, she did not display it, but I would say a very high percentage of patients do have paranoia. It's a very interesting phenomena that what is the relationship to the personality that emerges when a person gets Alzheimer's compared to the pre-morbid personality. I've seen individuals with Alzheimer's, very sweet guy, very loving, taking care of people, and then has Alzheimer's and is destroying the furniture in his room and is full of anger. It's really hard to know exactly what aspects of the personality are going to emerge when a person gets Alzheimer's disease. Paranoia is particularly common because you can lose things so easily, and then people think, oh, they must have been stolen. So it's really, it goes together with the memory loss. So paranoia sort of fits, and that's part of the reason why it does emerge. It's interesting she didn't have it.
Hi there. I just wanted to maybe think about also the specificity of the condition and how every case is very unique in relation to the question of sort of the prevalence of this particular kind of Alzheimer's that came up earlier, and kind of ask anybody who would want to field it about the stakes of choosing that kind of incredibly rare, specific sort of condition to represent filmically. Sort of what's at stake in using a really, really, really singular outlier case to unfold this narrative about Alzheimer's, and anybody who would want to speak to that, but maybe Laurie in particular, knowing something of your work, the sort of question of what's at stake when a particular condition is represented that way. So.
Right, thank you. Well, I think that we could take the positive view and say that having this representation opens up discussion, right, and perhaps leads people to want to learn more about Alzheimer's. Of course, we could also take the perspective that watching a younger person, in this case an actress that's very well known, might be more palatable to many audiences than watching the older type of person who is experiencing Alzheimer's. So there's that bit of a Hollywood part that I would be critical of, but then on the other hand, I would also say that maybe that is the strategy that is a good one to open up the door for more people to learn about this and to have audiences like this here.
You know, I would say that in reading reviews of this movie, and even to some extent my own opinion, I think they've made Alzheimer's look a little too good. She's very beautiful, she's very young, and there's the scenes in which there is really the kinds of real humiliation and all the other things that go often with Alzheimer's are often glossed over here. And I think her youthfulness is part of that. There are some very good movies about Alzheimer's where there's an older person who gets it. One is called Iris, about the writer Iris Murdoch. Another one is called Away From Her. Those are superb treatments of an older person with Alzheimer's.
So I have a question about the relationship between LDL cholesterol and statins and the protective effect of LDL cholesterol. I understand the brain is about 40% LDL cholesterol.
So we know that when your lipid profile is not normal, whether it's LDL or HDL or any of the components in a lipid profile, your risk for Alzheimer's goes up. We don't fully understand the relationship between the lipid profile and Alzheimer's, but the statistical association is there for sure.
Hi, this was just a comment actually to say that for those of you that want to see a bit more depth than the movie provides, as good as the movie is, the book does have some really powerful scenes in which the humiliation, and particularly in the academic context, is much more apparent. For example, what happens when you go to a talk in your department and you don't understand what's going on. And so I think it's also interesting what parts they took out to make it more palatable, that maybe, maybe a lot of people wouldn't really get this sort of academic context, so maybe they wanted to make it, a bit more mainstream in that sense. But I think it's also, like the reality of, if we know people with Alzheimer's or other dementia, like the bathroom and the sort of humiliation of what it means when someone realizes that they're peeing on themselves and that they need to have their child or grandchild take care of them. And that's just, we get a snippet of that, and I think that's one of the challenges to, having the Hollywood sort of version that you can show at film festivals. But yeah, thanks for that point.
Thank you very much. I have a question about current treatment or future new treatments that might be coming out on Alzheimer's.
So there are a number of clinical trials going on right now. The trials that are getting the most attention are to use an antibody that's given peripherally, given into the bloodstream, that will go into the brain and clean up the amyloid. And those trials have had very modest, if any, success so far. I even hate to use the word success. They've had a little bit of a signal that maybe they're working a little bit, but those are very early bits of information. We just don't know the results yet for those trials. They're being given to people that have the very earliest stages of the disease. To treat later stages of the disease is really very, very difficult, and we don't have a lot of research or clinical trials going on for the later stages. There's someone here.
I have a question. Pat mentioned Lewy body disease, and my husband has been diagnosed with that, and I'd certainly like to hear your description of that, or a helpful description of that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I haven't. You could probably speak to that too. I mean, I live with the one unique person I know who has it, and it's an outgrowth of Parkinson's. This is a person who'd had Parkinson's disease for about 20 years and got progressively had more difficulty with cognitive functioning, and a lot of the typical behavior of Lewy body disease about hallucinations and delusions, he had that earlier too, and it's exacerbated by the medications that they give you for Parkinson's. So it's all, you know, it's a challenge just to get the medical regime under control in some useful way. But it's, I don't know, I guess there are several hallmarks of it, and one is the hallucinations and delusions, and another is cognitive deficits that aren't pervasive and as totalizing as I think Alzheimer's can be in its end stages, but where, say, a whole function like spatial relations disappears, or ability to deal with numbers just goes. And the person can be perfectly operative in many other ways, and then suddenly you hit this blank spot in the brain, a particular function that's just been hollowed out and is gone, I guess.
Right. So Lewy body disease, and I think that's a great explanation of it clinically, the way it appears. So I'll say a word about what's going on in the brain. It's clinically, it can sometimes be a little hard to distinguish from Alzheimer's, except in those cases where the Lewy body disease begins with Parkinson's and then extends and starts to lead to dementia, because there is this relationship to Parkinson's. But Lewy body disease can begin sometimes without any Parkinsonian symptoms, and then it gets very tricky until you examine the brain pathologically. And then they're very, very different diseases. You've probably heard the term neurofibrillary tangle. That is what we see in the Alzheimer brain. It's made up of a protein called tau. In Lewy body disease, there's another term that's used for what we see under the microscope. It's called a Lewy body, and it's made up of a different protein called synuclein. So pathologically, they're quite different. Clinically, they can be a little blurred.
Yeah, I think I have along the similar question about the genetic correlation. In the movie, it seemed like it was genetic, but that was a very specific type. So I'm just curious. My grandma has Alzheimer's, so I'm just curious about how genetic and how common those symptoms come up within a family.
Yeah, so if you have one of the rare mutations, as we mentioned from the other gentleman, about 1% of people with Alzheimer's, if you have one of those mutations, those are bad mutations. They're called highly penetrant. It means you have the mutation, you get the disease. That's why the doctor told the daughter she's going to inevitably get it. But I'm getting the impression that perhaps in your family, the onset of the disease was later, perhaps not so early. So you could ask the question, what is a person's genetic risk if they don't have one of these really, really bad genes that's causing Alzheimer's at age 50? And if you have a first-degree relative with Alzheimer's, either a parent or a sibling, your risk does indeed go up, but it doesn't go up by a whole lot. There's a slight increase in your genetic risk. We don't know the genes that are causing that, but there is a little bit of a risk. There's a question.
This will be our final question. Have there been any findings that there's a correlation between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's?
So the question is a correlation between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. Here, that's a very strong correlation. In fact, there we even believe that we have a mechanism. What you said is absolutely true. When Down syndrome individuals get up in years, they inevitably develop plaques and tangles in their brain. And the reason they do is, Down syndrome has, it's called trisomy 21. It means they have an extra copy of a chromosome. And on that chromosome that's triplicated in Down syndrome is the gene for the amyloid. So they're making too much of it, and they inevitably get Alzheimer's.
Okay. So we're out of time. I again want to thank everyone who made this event possible, and thank you all for being here. Our panelists have been fabulous tonight. Thank you all for your insights after the film.